My name is Rolf. I will be speaking. Good afternoon. My name is Rolf. I will be speaking later panel. My question is with regard to the electronic identities and what your views are on the current law that has been passed in the parliament and currently is in Switzerland and now is will be debated and voted on in a referendum. What is your view?
Well, I think it's a basic infrastructure that needs to be guaranteed by the state or by the federation. So I'm a bit skeptical about this approach, and I think there might be some improvement possible.
Okay.
Do you mind if I? So I'm not extremely familiar. I'm definitely not an expert on the political situation around EID here, but from my perspective, my technical perspective, and my limited understanding of the intended reasons for this EID program, it raises a lot of red flags for me. I share some of your concerns that is this the right approach or is it the wrong approach? One of the concerns is it's, from what I see at least, there's a significant aspiration for this Swiss EID mechanism to be used for things like public e-voting, which I think would be a terrible idea for multiple reasons. At least the sovereign identity system as currently conceived. For one thing, because it couldn't solve these kinds of problems with coercion resistance, it would basically create a roadblock against the Swiss e-voting project being able to achieve international standards and expectations of coercion resistance in the future. It would be something you would have to roll back or fundamentally fix before you could actually get e-voting right. So it would be a terrible idea for that reason. And for another, if there's the expectation of the Swiss EID program being used as a way for the government to interact with people, outsourcing some of the functions of that, as I perceive to be the case, that would be an especially terrible idea because when you have multiple identity providers who are commercial or academic or whatever, not necessarily coordinating to identify and authenticate users instead of the government, you can't ensure, without massively violating privacy, you can't ensure that each person has only one ID or is signed up once. You have to have a uniqueness or deduplication property for many of the government-required uses of identity, including for sure voting, but also signing up for social services, safety net kind of thing. There's a critical, uniqueness or deduplication property is really critical for that. And self-sovereign identity can't architecturally do that unless the government is still, in that critical position. And if the government is still doing that, then having EID doesn't really help the government. It doesn't help with costs or outsourcing. It's just a cost on the government, right? So I know I rambled on a lot longer than you do, but I'm happy to hear about other perspectives.
Rolf, good to see you. I think I'm not gonna get into this too much because I don't deal with identity. In my perspective, I think voting and identity should be completely, two different businesses and two different professions. Why? Because if someone one day comes to me and says, hey, you have the possibility of having the identity of the guys who voted, that's a massive issue. And I don't want to be responsible of, hearing someone, I don't want to be responsible of having even the possibility of using these IDs so for me, it's something that I don't want to get in at all. And this is also like something that I want to tell you, if you guys want to go with a voting provider, please make sure that the voting provider and the ID provider at least are, in some fashion, not working together. Because even though I come to you and I tell you, okay, you don't have to worry, my system is 100% safe, and even though I have the identities and I know all these people, you don't need to worry because no one can ever come to me and give me money or put a gun on my head and ask me for his identity. It's better if I don't have him at all. So this is for my life.
Yeah. Our approach to digital identity is a little different. We want we need minimum amount of data to use ours. For example, if you're an employee of a company, for you to participate in the deliberation inside the company, what you need is you are an employee of the company, and you are not a global, or you're a human being, and you will be represented as a unique person and only once. You don't have kind of multiple identities, so you have only one identity. That is the minimum requirement to use our app. So what we want to try to achieve is to making a very fancy digital identity could attract many lawbreakers, outlaws, to steal some valuable information out of your servers or out of your system. So what we are trying to do is kind of give rise people maximum level, but minimize the amount of data you gather for them to allow their own rights. That is our approach.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Because otherwise, I mean, I have a couple of them, and I would actually want to start with you, Kibonga, because you mentioned, that I actually found this example that you gave right at the beginning about bullying and how it affects your voting. I mean, it's basically a commercial story, so I find it very compelling, and in a sense, it's really a story that a lot of people are telling experience in social media these days, and I mean, more real-life implications. I'm coming from Germany, and we have increasingly bullying at the local political level, where local politicians are being bullied because of their open public statements, etc. So clearly, there's a question for you to this type of tool seems to somehow provide an answer to that. My question to you is, at some point, Nassim Taleb says you have to have skin in the game. If you have an opinion, you can't just anonymously express that opinion. You have to be open and stand behind that opinion. Otherwise, it loses credibility. So the question for me is, rather than finding a solution ex ante in terms of finding the technology solutions through this type of applications, isn't that also an issue of an ex post solution, in the sense that we need to be able to make sure that those who are being bullied those who are bullying can be pursued, that there is a legal way, a legal procedure that we can use and pursue in order to make sure that this kind of extreme type of behavior is not happening. Isn't that, at least, in a sense, a complementary effort that we need to do on both sides of the equation?
Our approach to prevent bullying or some bad things happening in our app is to dismotivate or disincentivize bad behavior, because the voices are limited resources for everyone. So if someone spends their voices for doing something bad, then he will lose the opportunity to gain attraction from others or gain rewards from the system. So that is one thing. And people listening to his opinion, if someone say badly about something, then people will think that, oh, this one has, his idea is not good. So I don't want to listen to him anymore. So you can mute those guys. listener situation.
I can follow up to that too. Yeah, I think this area is an area I've done research in as well. Before I came here to EPFL, one of my main research topics back at Yale University was accountable anonymity, and there's a lot of research work in that space. We definitely have the technology, the cryptographic means and things like that to do things like what Kibong is talking about, have real identities somewhere, but anonymize them in a one-to-one accountable fashion, or 10-to-1 or whatever, in a fair and equitable fashion. And there's multiple types of accountability. So that accountability is a big design space, right? And being able to send the police after someone, I see as maybe a capability you sometimes need, but that's a really worst case, that's the most extreme scenario. The common case scenario is, somebody's just not thinking, enough before they're speaking, or, being, and I think having, more points in that design space to work with, such as just being able to have the community in a forum push back, say, hey, that's not acceptable. Or have individuals be able to block that. I don't want to hear from that pseudonym anymore. Other people can hear from them, but I don't want, And these are all things that you can do with this kind of approach without necessarily calling the police. Now, it's still an interesting and important question for debate. Do you need to have the nuclear option of actually calling the cops if an anonymous poster to a forum, is doing something really patently illegal or something? That's an interesting question too. But I see it as the nuclear option that's almost all the time unnecessary, and we want to have better options. And I'm glad to see companies like Kibong's bring this thing to market.
Thank you. Just to follow up on this, you mentioned nuclear option. The thing about nuclear options is that you never use them, but you have them. And I think in certain cases, I talk for my own home country, and sometimes it would have been useful to have it, and I think we don't have it yet. Right, please.
I'm not sure if we can really distinguish both cases. In a certain company scenario, you want to enable critics to speak out about being responsible for what they say because they're afraid of sanctions. And if you want to guarantee them that they stay anonymous, that they cannot be prosecuted because they question the company policy, then you will have a hard time to prosecute them because they said something nasty. And maybe you can even have some cases where it's difficult to distinguish those cases. So either anonymity is provided and you have some risk of bad behavior, or you provide less anonymity and more control. Or maybe you found a solution to it, but I don't see one.
Can I just quickly? Yeah, so that's a great point. The technology is there either to have the nuclear option or not to have the nuclear option. Now, whether you want to have the nuclear option is an important policy decision, and like you just said, having it may discourage people from coming forward who might otherwise come forward, and so it's an important trade-off.
Yeah, I think it's really important to stress the point that it's true that through anonymity we would have quantitatively more people speaking, right? Like more people would go behind their keyboard and write things, and statistically, obviously, more nasty things will end up also coming out. But I think it's very important to keep that happening. And I think that statistically also, there's some sort of natural selection in our way of selecting the information, our way of treating the information, and our way also of treating the people who provide the information. I think that there are we still behave as normal distributions. There are various people can go a bit far here and there, but our appreciation also follows a normal distribution. We also can be biased, but most of us will end up fairly understandable and understanding the right things and the wrong things. And I think it's a good thing to let things happen like this. But it's true that in terms of this is my personal opinion, it's a very personal opinion. But it's true that in terms of technology, we have the right tools now to just shut down whoever needs to be and so it ends up the same question: should we have it, should we not have it? Having it is a good thing, or having it is a bad thing? Is having it will be proactive thing to enable people to only go for the right behaviors and kind of force us to kind of calm down and tone down the bad behaviors. I think yes. I think having the option is definitely a good choice. This is again my personal opinion. Never using it is also something that should be kind of written and enforced. Yeah.
We have experiments in our own company for about 1 year, and as she noted, it helped a lot. And one of the funny experiments we've done was on me. Every member of our companies kind of could leave an opinion on me, how they think about me, after reading a book named Radical Candor. And I found out that with this anonymity, I could get their idea on me. If I asked them, I couldn't get that kind of frank or honest opinion on me, and I really appreciated that. So my thinking about the anonymity is that I believe there are many good people, much more than bad people. Good people outnumber bad people, and that is why we believe in the superiority of democracy, because we believe, even though there are a small number of people who want to ruin the system, however, those good guys are numbered. So that is why we welcome democracy for whatever. So, being afraid of bad behavior of small number of people, if you get rid of or deprive of the personal rights to be very honest and frank, then I don't think it's very fair. And so what we want to do is give the equal number of voices to all of them, so that those small number of people cannot throw or ruin the system. That is our approach.
If nuclear weapon should be, then it should be in the hands of the right people. And this is a very difficult thing also to, I don't want to have, I'd rather have nuclear weapons in the hands of Obama rather than have them in the hands of Trump. I mean, nothing changed. It's still the same. But there are, and so, abusing, he could go completely mental on the nuclear weapon, if he's not the right guy. He could go and he could try to find out who is who, but obviously he's not doing it. So the nuclear weapon should be in the hands of the right guy, which brings us to another philosophical, like just moving the subject to another.
I think it's a good question. On this point, I would just sorry to interrupt you, but and I think it brings back Brian as well in this discussion. To me, to some extent, this coercion point that you stressed a lot in your talk, it has something to do with the fact that we're actually collecting too much information for people. We actually don't need. I mean, you mentioned about to be coerced into a particular voting. when you vote for, let's say, federal election. But what you actually need for the federal election, you only need the identification that you're Swiss national. You don't need anything else. We give too much information by having all your, let's say, the birthdays, location, etc. I mean, and that comes back to your point also. Isn't there a bit of a trade-off? We actually don't we collect too much information. It creates all these problems that we try to solve later on.
Absolutely, and this is actually one of my big critiques of of most identity approaches to e-identity, including most of the self-sovereign identity approaches, in that what they often boil down to is just new ways to prove to someone what my name and birth date and my identity proxies are, that can then be used to link to me and violate my privacy and collect it into databases and stuff like that. I think the one good class of truly privacy preserving use for identity, including self-sovereign identity, is illustrated by the proving I'm over 18. Just getting a 1-bit proof. Am I over 18 or not? Am I eligible to vote or in this election or not? And when the use of identity can be reduced to a 1-bit, eligible or no, member or non-member, that actually can be a privacy-preserving use, right? But of course there's the coercion, the coercion issue, or am I eligible, but I'm actually acting on behalf of somebody who's coercing me. And I think that affects many other uses of EID, such as digital signing as well, at least in principle. Am I being coerced to sign this document digitally because I'm not at a notary's office who is supposed to check that I'm there alone and signing this of my own free will, right? So it's not just voting where coercion is an issue, but that's where it's the most prominent issue.
No, just the fact the nuclear option was the fact that suddenly you could de-anonymize, come back to that will kill everything. Because I think in the real life, because people they won't even believe, even if it's really anonymized, they won't believe you because nobody believes no one anymore. So I think what will be most difficult in real life will be to convince people that they can really speak out because this is really anonymous. That's what I think is the main real difficulty nowadays if you want to get the real opinion by people.
But so can I ask you a question on this one? I mean, my experience is not that people are afraid of speaking out. I mean, using the example of Germany, maybe it's different in Switzerland. In Germany, you can get illegal proposals in social media with the full name of the person behind it, calling for hatred, calling for killing people, calling for killing elected officials in Germany. And it happened. People are dead. People are dying or getting bullied. And I think in Germany, at least, we have an increasing issue at the local level that people are increasingly afraid of running for office because they're feeling that if they express themselves a certain type of opinions, they will immediately get bullied. And so then the question becomes, it's not that the people are afraid of talking anonymously. People are speaking out. But there's a certain type of people that you actually, and you cannot disconnect from them because even if you disconnect, somebody else will not. And so for me, that question is I still believe that somehow you need to have a nuclear option at the end to kind of be able to identify the person if there's something goes beyond what is covered by your freedom of speech, for instance.
When you look at social media is not anonymous. Even if you use a pseudonym, it's not anonymous. We know we have the nuclear option there. And people are speaking out and people are doing nasty stuff. So I don't think that this is really an issue, that missing total anonymity is creating a huge problem there. There might be circumstances where it is, where more is at stake, and especially when it comes to e-voting, we don't want to have this nuclear option, of course. But what would be interesting to me is, in your system, is it always anonymous, or can the person select and decide whether they want to post anonymously or whether they want to be able to be identified. And if both options exist, what did you discover? What were people using, the named option or the anonymous option?
Yeah, throughout the entire system, when you get on board, you have a AI root level AID. There's something you can call a secret key, master key, or whatever. And from this one, when you enter a new group, a group represents a community or company or whatever, a group of people, then we create a new AID, next level. So there is no difference between level. However, for easy understanding, I use the term level. And the creator of the group can request any new member to use the real name or not. So when you enter, it's real name group, then should I go into or not? It's up to you. And after that, even though you're using your real name as the group display name, every activity like new meeting or new vote or new review, the creator of this activity can choose whether he can request the participant to use their group display name. In this case, it could be real name or just group display nickname, or use a randomly assigned nickname for this activity. So the group members, when they think over whether to participate in this specific activity, they can think, this is kind of using the group display name, but then it's not safe place, so I don't want to participate in this. Or if it's very anonymous, then you can choose to enter. But sometimes some discussions or some decision making needs accountability over anonymity. In that case, the creator or the moderator of the activity can have the right to request the real name option. So that is kind of very flexible.
And what was your observation when you tested the system?
In our own company, they prefer anonymity. And the default is anonymous.
Okay.
I just want to get back to the two points. The first, I think that the point that you made is very valid. It depends obviously on the society. It also depends on the social pressure that we have. For example, in some areas, having women speaking up and saying things with identified as so might be an issue. Also, in some societies where I don't know, some people are more shy or just don't speak up as much as we do here. It would help. I don't know. I've never been to China, but maybe in China or maybe in Japan, it could help. I don't want to generalize. I didn't live there, but it seems to me that maybe this tool, being anonymous, could help. Now the other thing that you said, which I found really interesting, is there is definitely a trade-off between the technical providers or the researchers and the businessman and the businesswoman in terms of data collection and user data. Here, I think it would be much better if we focus more and we spend more time on the research side, kind of lower the data points that we need to get people to vote or to get people to express their voices. And I'm not sure that the businessmen and women that we have now, who are definitely in the business of data, would want something like this to even, so those who are supposed to protect our data, or those who are dealing with our data, it's not necessarily in the best interest to lower the data points. That's why I really think that, for example, for the purpose of voting, there is no way I could be in the data business, because there is a clear issue here of, which side.
That's a great question, and I would like to have the two of you more about how can we solve that problem. Because that's exactly what you mentioned. Companies have an interest to collect a lot of data without even knowing what they want to do with them. And I mean, this is a problem we have.
But they're also increasingly understanding that that data can become toxic too, and can come back to bite them in all sorts of ways, right? And you know, I think companies are rightfully starting to think more carefully, and they need to, and needs to get farther of, you know, what data do we really need, and what can that, you know, what will happen to us if that data gets leaked or hacked or, you know, or coerced away from, you know, out of our control or something, right? And so, yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, again, coming back to your concern, I think there often, you know, this is a policy decision. Ultimately, it depends on either the organization or the country in question, but this is a policy decision of, you know, to have the nuclear option or not to have the nuclear option. It's important to be aware that there are almost but not quite nuclear options. For example, there's another pretty well-researched class of technologies that, I don't know, maybe maybe is already in your radar, such as blacklistable anonymous credentials, meaning I have an anonymous credential that, you know, where nobody is going to be able to find me. The police won't find me. But if I misbehave, then my one and only pseudonym in this anonymous forum will be revoked, and I can't speak anymore. I'm just, you know, I lose my speech either permanently or for as long a time as policy dictates, right? And I think, you know, and I think in many cases, you know, if people know that there isn't a nuclear option, but your, you know, ability to speak in this forum depends on you, you know, not misbehaving so badly, not doing death threats or things like that, right? That will be a strong deterrent, but people will be, you know, that'll help preserve, you know, ensure that people will speak freely when it's, you know, something legitimate, a legitimate concern that they're worried about. Another important aspect, though, coming back to the problem of identity and, you know, how the mechanisms of identity works. Any you know, anonymous forum or other, you know, social media forum has to have some notion of identity, and I agree with Leo's earlier point that we need different forms, different flavors of identity with different properties for different uses. E-voting really needs a different kind of identity than corporate, you know, internal forums and things like that. But we also, as long as say, you know, when we're talking about corporate internal forums and things like that, if people perceive the risk that, well, you know, my login and my anonymous ID is dependent on the corporate, you know, internal identity system, and there's probably some system administrator there who could impersonate me or abuse my identity, that is another reason why people might hesitate to come forward, right? And you know, we know, again, there are technological ways we can get out of that, create, you know, identity systems even for corporate use that no insider in that company can, you know, can break, and that might actually, in fact, be desirable to ensure that, you know, people can really speak freely, right? And in the larger kind of the public identity case, this is in terms of public, you know, online deliberation, public democracy, you know, governance of the online ecosystem. I see this as one of the really important fundamental challenges that's still unsolved. How to give people identities that are accountable but anonymous, where you know that there isn't the nuclear option, at least not quite. There's a strong disincentive for abuse because I can lose my right to participate in a forum that I abuse, but you know, but I can lose them, right? And so that's actually one of the research projects my lab is working on. We have a project called Proof of Personhood, where we're trying to create a very private, anonymous way where people at large can kind of get anonymous identities that prove you're a real person. I mean, you only get one, and then you can engage in forums like this without depending on any company or a government or any player being able to de-anonymize you, right? So, there's no magic there. There's some important trade-offs too, but I'll leave it at that. I just another important challenge that we face in general.
Maybe back to the original question: how can we incentivize companies to collect too much data? We have a technology, and basically we have Google, we have Facebook, Microsoft IDs, and they do engage in the decentralized identity space as well. I don't really know what they are going for there, how much they want to influence it, because if done correctly, they will lose power. Concerning the amount of data they collect, currently we have the consent model applied in many cases, and they need consent for us for very little, and because they need consent anyway, they ask for very much, and we consent to it. And this is currently a problem that should be solved, and it should be solved by different means. For example, we can have software agents that automatically consent to good policies. We could have data unions, like labor unions, data unions that negotiate with big companies, because we as an individual, we have no negotiating power versus the big companies. We can have kind of a categorization of data policies. Currently, we have to read 50 pages to find out if it's a good or bad policy. It should be much easier, and we should be able to say, well, this is a good policy, I accept it, I automatically accept it. I don't want this annoying pop-ups showing up all the time, because I accept this policy, whereas the bad policies, they should get harder. And we should build this kind of stuff. I'm not a fan of basically terminating consent and patronizing users by telling them you must not consent to certain things. So I think we should empower users and not remove power from them. And empowering users means that we should give them the tools that they need and that they don't have currently. And data unions and software agents could be those kind of tools that help them to do and to use their power.
I think that's a very good point. And I mean, actually, we have 10 minutes left, so I would like to throw in just on my last question to the panel here is the data unions part. And we, as you know, in our Geneva Blockchain Solutions paper on blockchain, like we mentioned as well, it's the issue of data as labor. Glenn Wright from Microsoft put that forward. The idea basically to remunerate your data rather than giving you access to some kind of free goodies on the internet. You're having actually a monetary incentive to provide data, and for the companies obviously then only to collect those data which I really think they can use and provide you for kind of input for. So I mean, I would like to have the views of all four of you on this. Is that a realistic option, or is that total nonsense?
I'm not sure, but remuneration could be one thing that is good, but it's not the solution. If Facebook pays us $5 francs every month, it wouldn't solve anything. But of course, negotiating power is the solution. And negotiating power could also result in some kind of remuneration, but it is not the main part of the solution. The main part is that we have a better negotiating position to basically force them with the stick in the card to behave better. So the stick is basically even a data strike. Stick is the law, but the carrot is telling them if you behave correctly, it will be easier for you to offer services. It will be easier because you don't need to build all those consent walls, and we will accept your service and your way of dealing with our data because we check that it's an acceptable way to do so.
one way to go would be to redesign the flux of data. Because if you give all your data from day one, then you have no negotiation power. So, right? So, if, for example, Facebook is or let's say, I don't know, Facebook is interested in like 4 or 5 key databases, and then the others are less important, and then the others are less important, just kind of reevaluating who you are, right? But if these companies are really capable, and they will be, and they are more and more capable of really kind of, you know, sniping and decisively knowing who you are with less data points and quicker. If you give these data points too soon, then it's over. You have no negotiating power. So maybe the way to go would be, instead of having us give the data directly to these companies, having some sort of intermediary in the middle, who would be maybe half public, half private, half, you know, guided by us, half, you know, I don't know. Maybe blockchain could be one of the options here, where we can have a flux of data, and we can cut the flux of data, and we can control which data, and we can erase data, and they have no way for them to snap the data to keep the data, right? I have a good friend of mine who's working on a healthcare system, where if you, for example, go to Spain on holidays and you're sick because you have pain in your stomach, then you give the needful data to the doctor to cure you, and then when you're back from holidays, he doesn't need that data anymore. He doesn't need to know you anymore, and certainly not needs to know that you were you know, under medication for depression 3 years ago. This is none of his business. So being able to own our data in some way, and here we have to be very careful, because a lot of technical providers are offering you blockchain services, they're actually centralized blockchain services on their own blockchain, and they give you their own data, they give you access to your own data. That's not the way to go. But if we can imagine a way where there is some sort of intermediary between the companies and us that can regulate the flux of data that goes from us to them, and they can cut the flux of data to enable us to enter negotiation with them, because it's their core business, what they need, and maybe it could work. Now, regarding one of the things that we discuss a lot, and even me and him, the first time that I met him at the UNIGE. He was speaking after a film called The Cleaners, right? And these guys were basically trying to understand the hard work behind the people who are cleaning our social medias, because there are people who are cleaning our social medias. Most of them are based out of the Philippines, and they decide whether information should go on Facebook or not. And they decide that information should go on Facebook based only on the fact if it's, you know, if your eye can accept it or not, and it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a fake news or not a fake news. And I think it's very important also to put the tech businesses also in the middle, because usually we say either the tech companies need to be more responsible, so we have to force them to do this and this and that. I'm going to give you an example where actually I don't know what's going on, I don't know what's the best. And I still need to implement a solution, and it's really not me trying to be, or us trying to be more controlling or gaining more power, but we just don't know what's the best solution, and we're waiting for better research and better implementation. We're not a massive fan of the rating things, the rating processes. So one of the nuclear weapons or pseudo-nuclear weapons that we might have is rating systems. For example, in voting, we don't rate voters or votes, but we rate the feedback of people who assess the election and the consensus So people would go back to us and say, hey, basically, in our region, the political party was supposed to send us a bus, and the bus never arrived, so we couldn't go to the polling station. And since we are from the opposition side, this is a move. Like the ruling side is making to force us not to vote. Okay. So here you can take your phone and say, I'm in that region in Sierra Leone, or I'm in that region in Tunisia, and I couldn't have access to public transportation. I was promised to me to be able to go to the polling station. If your feedback is good enough, and you're giving feedback more and more for small election, big size election, national election, regional election, then we would rate you, right? But the problem with this is that I don't know if you guys watch Black Mirror. If you have an idea what Black Mirror is, rating systems can also be very bad and cynical in a way where you can be completely excluded from the society because you don't have good ratings. Because you can't get good ratings to be able to get housing, house. You can get good ratings. So we don't know what's the best. But still, we are kind of forced to use this system because that's the best system that we have in hands now. And it's not us technical providers trying to make the society worse or trying to. It's just that's what we have for now.
I guess that we figured that one out in a couple of years' time in the Chinese social rating system.
Yeah, social support.
Some last words from Kimon and Brian, and then we unfortunately to close.
Okay, so just to address a couple of quick concept issues. I think you brought up consent, and I think this question is really critical when we're talking about, say, use of data, any envisioned use of data, as well as use of, in a sovereign identity system, companies asking you, hey, I want you to prove this or that attribute, to use our services or something like that. I think, but this is where, again, coercion becomes a big issue because, is consent actually not only informed but free will, right? How many of you have encountered a website that sends you a message saying, okay, we use cookies, we need you to accept the cookies in order to, for the functionality of the web, in order for you to use the website, right? Is this both informed and free will consent? It kind of gets to the point where, well, sorry, if you want to play the game and use this at all, you better click yes, right? And one of my worries is if data sharing systems, we can technically build these kinds of data sharing and supervision systems, and we can build self-sovereign identity systems, but if the supply side on the web, still retains basically all the power to create an ecosystem where if you don't hand over your true identity and your data, then you're not in the game at all, right? And then we won't actually have any more privacy than we do now. If anything, be even worse, right? And that's I think underlines the importance of developing systems and policies that ensure that we should almost never. The common case should be that for practically all applications, you don't need to identify yourself. Identity is not usually what you need at all. You just need something else to prove that you're a real person, as opposed to a fake account or thousands of bots or something like that. That part is important. You need to prove that you have accountability, but not identity in most cases, right? And that's one of the continuing challenges to be able to be a person on the internet without without even being coerced to sign over either data or identity. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Kim, you want to say last words?
I think time has passed, so let me shortly conclude my message to you. The problem of today's digital identity is that the definition of identity has nothing to do with the personal information. But I found from Wikipedia that digital identity is defined as a set of information. So that is the source of the problem. Identity in real world has nothing to do with my personal data. So what we have to achieve for the future identity in digital world is to overcome the gap. I believe so. So as long as we pursue that way, then I believe we can reach that space.
Great, thank you very much for this positive concluding message. So I invite everybody to give a hand to this great panel. I just 20 minutes, we have a coffee break now, but the discussion on public